hey, he's our next live guest. Maybe he can tell us how he survived the apocalypse. Danny, what do you think? How are you planning to survive?
I wasn't going to say join Michael because I've traveled with him before and he seems like, like MacGyver man, and I would have felt confident, but I don't know his strategy is lining with mine. I'd probably find a government bunker that none of us know about.
I like that. Seek shelter and just wait it out.
That's why he bought one of the old missile silos up in the upper Midwest.
Yeah.
He's being sustainable. He's reusing his resources.
He's sustainable.
Well, Danny, thank you for joining us today. It's not Monday, it's Tuesday, but it's time to chat with you guys about what's going on for this week's edition of Net Zero Carbon. We've got a special guest with us today, but before we get there, talk to us a little bit about these most recent episodes.
Yeah, they've been really fun. I'm jumping back in the saddle and doing more of these interviews. We talked to Trax, who has been working really closely with us on digging in on footprinting. So GHG accounting is a term that you'll hear, so greenhouse gas accounting, and understanding what people's footprint is. Transportation is such a big emitter, such a big part of really creating a net zero world. And really the first thing that we say is measure, measure, measure. Historically, what people have done is done that in the best way they can. And what we've realized in consultation with Trax is that you've got to do better, because what the default way of calculating is by using defaults, and defaults generally are 70% higher than if we were to look at the primary data. So that sounds, we're overestimating emissions. Maybe that is true, but the way that the GLAC framework, which is kind of a global ISO standard, is set up, is that it's encouraging people to provide more granular data so we can have a better, more accurate picture of what those emissions are. And so check out that episode from a couple weeks ago to dig in more to that topic. And then last week we talked about hydrogen, which was super interesting. One, it was a lot of basic information, educating myself on, what some of these projects are that are out there and why hydrogen is such a perfect fuel for long haul trucking, because it does have, different characteristics than EV and different infrastructure and kind of refueling components than some of the alternatives out there. So both of those episodes are super insightful with great guests. And so I encourage both you guys as well as everyone else to go check them out.
Yeah, definitely will go back and look at those yet again, because there's a lot of great information there. You can't just watch it once. You got to watch it over and over again to really get all the information that is there. And it's really great to see that the driving demand for climate change, or action against or to prevent and reverse climate change, is still growing, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we're just really in the early innings. And, our sponsor here at Convoy has been really focused on education, but also talking about efficiency. And so when we look at the pyramid, again, it's measure first, find out ways to be more efficient. Convoy is doing a really good job of that. Create partnerships so we can work together to really tackle this problem collectively. And at the end of the day, then there's always the option to offset your emissions by using carbon credits for achieving net zero.
Absolutely. And speaking of Convoy, we've got another guest to join you, Danny, for the second half of this interview today. We've got Kiana Van Ways, who is a corporate sustainability analyst with Convoy. So thank you, Kiana, for joining us. And I'll let the two of you guys get into a little bit of conversation about climate change in Davos.
Thank you for having me to join in on today's conversation, especially after the Memorial Day weekend.
Yeah, thanks for joining us. So, Kiana, I want to thank you for participating in our working group. But your addition to the working group is awesome. We've been working collaboratively with Convoy to understand, what it feels like on the front lines for, really understanding our role in emission reduction. So we want to thank you for that. We also want to take the opportunity to lean on your knowledge and your expertise here to talk about some activities that are happening across really the globe and how people are linking arms together. There's out of Davos was this First Movers Coalition that is really interesting. I just wanted to get your thoughts, maybe share with us what that means and what it means for Convoy.
Yeah, absolutely. I first want to recognize that climate change was front and center at Davos this year. It ended up, climate change topics made up a third of panel discussions during May 22nd to the 26th. And we have to remember that it wasn't long ago that climate change wasn't even a topic of discussion on a single panel. In 2014, only a year before the landmark Paris Climate Accord was signed, all climate-related panels were actually happening in a tent outside of the main conference area. So it's really exciting to know that climate change is front and center and a forefront of the topics this year. But yeah, the exciting news that happened was that more than 50 companies in 9 countries, representing more than 40% of the global GDP, have committed to clean up the world's hard-to-abate industry sectors that account for 30% of global emissions. This includes aviation, shipping, trucking, chemicals, concrete, aluminum, and steel. And really the idea behind this buyers club, it's known as the First Movers Coalition, is to stoke demand for green versions of materials that have proved difficult to manufacture without significant carbon dioxide emissions. John Kerry, part of the UN climate envoy, stated that this is really a demand signal and one of the biggest demand signals we could possibly send. So this is really exciting news for the industry, showing that investments are actually going to be made in this space to fund lower carbon technologies. We've really seen a wave of many countries and companies signing pledges or committing to net zero targets or setting science-based targets over the last few years. We've really seen this bell curve of companies and countries joining. But the next, a lot of criticism has come around these commitments that, how are we going to actually ensure that we are funding these lower carbon technologies? And so this is really like that next step, the missing piece really to stoke demand for these hard to abate sectors and ensure that we actually have, investment in technology, lower carbon technologies, and then also expanding and existing technologies that are available today that can drive more efficiencies in the industry.
What do you think? I look at all of the organizations that are out there that are pulling people, a lot of companies together globally. Everything seems to feel centered in Europe. Do you feel like, one, I guess maybe give us some insight on the history and like why that is happening. And maybe it's just because that's where world leaders tend to meet up at these conferences. But do you feel like from a ripple effect that the U.S. is lagging in terms of kind of energy, like collective enthusiasm for these changes? I think we still, in my personal opinion, like there's a little cultural work we have to do here to understand like our collective role. Maybe just give some insight on like the Europe-centric and where Europe is versus the U.S. and what you hope to see happening or changing here stateside.
Yeah, absolutely. I think this is, I came from a global industry before, working in the outdoor sports industry, footwear and apparel. And a lot of our sustainability efforts then were driven by our teams in Europe. But you also see this in the fact that their energy investments over time across Europe, they have a much more green grid. So like across the entire region, more so than in the United States. So they've been on this journey for a lot longer than we have been, working to green their grid, use more renewable energy. And then, I think it's inspiring for us to actually follow along. But absolutely, the States have always kind of been a little bit behind in some of these leading technologies. So we would love to see more action, and we have been seeing with the new administration more pledges to commit to taking climate action and decarbonizing our energy grids by 2030. It would be great for us to kind of, join along on that, on those efforts.
Yeah, and I think what I'm seeing just in conversation anecdotally is that there's more attention. I think even from the working group, what the comment we heard early on was that shippers felt they felt the pressure to include transportation in their emission reducing efforts, but that it wasn't the market wasn't really ready for it, and we still had a lot of work to do on data sharing. So I think that's an important thing to highlight, that the market is open, right? Like from a they want to see this happen. Shippers who are going to drive a lot of this activity are global. You have a lot of multinationals who are leading this and doing this in other regions, and also trying to bring those practices here to the U.S. For the pledge specifically, and having them identify hard to abate sectors. Transportation is very much a hard to abate sector, not because we don't understand how to do it, it's just because it is such a fragmented industry, and that it is going to take a lot of effort to coordinate change across such a large set of providers and companies. When you think about Convoy, I think in the announcement that they also talked about not just investing in technologies, but also investing in existing efficiencies that are happening. Do you see that covering kind of the Empty Miles pledge that you guys are so well known for?
Yeah, absolutely. One of the biggest aspects of this pledge is they're wanting to support commercially ready technologies and ensure that they can scale up over the next decade to meet these decarbonization goals that we've set. Convoy focuses on solving the problems of waste and inefficiency in the freight industry. And by doing so, we reduce the costs for shippers, improves the lives of more than 3 million truck drivers, and ultimately help save the planet. And, this technology is available today. We're already working with Fortune 500 shippers like Home Depot, P&G, Niagara, and Unilever, who trust Convoy to reduce costs, increase logistics efficiency, and achieve sustainability targets. So we're already on this path today, but we're definitely working to scale as quickly as we can. As we approach 2030, and more shippers and carriers will be needing efficient networks to meet their decarbonization goals.
Yeah, I think Dan was quoted in an article. I feel like I saw it over the weekend. Dan Lewis, your CEO, founder and CEO, about how quickly the digital revolution is going to happen inside of freight. And I think for those who aren't super familiar with, where we were 10 years ago, I've been watching just from the sidelines in an adjacent industry, and through FreightWaves, I've seen so much tech, so much investment, so much changing, obviously with cellular phones, cellular networks, digitization processes, and understanding how complex the network is to service the needs of all the consumers to bring goods and foods. That digitization is really the needed answer that couldn't have come soon enough. And so for Convoy to be here and providing, being a thought leader in that space, and also servicing not just the efficiencies from a network perspective, but also highlighting and talking about what that means for emissions, I think is super important, because what we tend to focus on here, at least historically talking to firms, is focus on efficiency and what that means for your business, and look at the cost savings and what you can do for your bottom line, no pun intended, as an exhaust from that, is that you will be reducing emissions, right? And so I think that's been hugely beneficial that Convoy is leading that charge. And so we thank you for coming on. Anything to keep a lookout for Convoy? I know you guys are always putting out new content and new information.
Yeah, we'll be releasing our corporate sustainability report, the Ship Responsibly report, here soon in June. So yeah, keep an eye out for that. But yeah, thank you for having me on, Danny. It was great to chat with you.
Likewise.
That's for this segment. Of course, you can normally catch our Net Zero Carbon recaps and our Convoy-sponsored segments with us on Mondays here on Freight Waves Now. Great to have to push it back one day. And then, of course, you can find all of those episodes of Net Zero Carbon up on demand on tv.freightwaves.com and then catch them every Friday afternoon right here on Freightwaves TV.
Yeah, absolutely. Great stuff. And living intentionally is what I always preach, and Dad is going to help you do that, right?
Peace and love when it comes to the earth, right?
Peace and love, man. Peace and love.
All right, we're going to take one last quick break. We'll be back to wrap up your show with a last check of weather coming up in just a few minutes.